My family told everyone I was a failure. I sat quietly at my brother's engagement dinner while the expensive wine flowed. Then his fiancée turned to me and murmured, "Wait." The room went still. Even my mom was speechless, her hand frozen mid-air. I kept my napkin flat on my knees, feeling the heavy silver weight of my fork. Julian laughed, a sharp sound that didn't reach his eyes. He thought he was the center of this universe. He was wrong. The private dining room smelled of charred steak and arrogance. Dark wood panels absorbed the light, casting long shadows over the white linen. My father leaned back, his thumb tracing the rim of his crystal glass. He spoke about legacy like it was something he had built alone. Every time he mentioned my name, he added a small, pitying smile. I focused on the candle flame flickering between us. It was a tiny, controlled burn. The heat was starting to spread beneath the table. Julian reached over to pat my hand, a gesture meant to look kind for the guests. His palm was damp. I noticed the slight tremor in his fingers as he checked his watch for the third time. He was waiting for a wire transfer that would never arrive. My mother smoothed a wrinkle in the tablecloth, her eyes avoiding mine. She only saw the daughter who lived in a small apartment. She never saw the servers I owned across the globe. The air grew thick. Elena didn't look away from me. She was a venture analyst who hunted for unicorns in the dark. I saw the moment her professional mask cracked. She recognized my voice from the encrypted keynote I delivered last month. The silence at the table wasn't empty anymore. It was heavy with her realization. My brother tried to start a new story about his firm's expansion. Elena didn't laugh. She stared at my simple watch, realizing it cost more than Julian's entire car. "It is a very technical field," my mother said, trying to fill the quiet. She spoke slowly, as if I were a child who had lost her way. "Ava just needs a little more stability." My father nodded in agreement, offering a toast to traditional paths. I took a slow sip of water, watching Elena's face pale. She knew the merger Julian was bragging about had been blocked by my board an hour ago. The predatory grace of the room had shifted entirely toward me. I set my glass down with a precise, metallic click. The sound echoed against the wood. Julian opened his mouth to deliver another punchline, but Elena's hand on his arm stopped him. Her grip was tight enough to leave a mark. She wasn't looking at her future husband anymore. She was looking at the woman who controlled his debt. I leaned forward, letting the candlelight finally hit my eyes. The dinner wasn't an engagement celebration. It had just become a professional liquidation. The silence stretched thin like a wire about to snap. Julian pulled his arm away from Elena, his face flushing a deep, mottled red. He didn't understand why she was staring at me. To him, I was still the background noise of his perfect life. He cleared his throat and adjusted his silk tie with jerky movements. "Elena, don't mind her," he said. His voice was too loud for the room. He looked around for the waiter's approval. My father sensed the shift and tried to reclaim the floor. He began a long story about a family networking night I had missed. I remembered that night clearly. I had watched from the darkness of my room as guests arrived in black cars. My mother had told me it was too technical for my interests. She said she wanted me to stay comfortable. In reality, she didn't want my quiet presence to ruin her curated success story. The memory tasted like cold iron. I looked at my mother now. She was smiling at a guest, but her fingers were white where she gripped her wine glass. She was performing for an audience that was starting to look elsewhere. Elena was typing something into her phone under the table. Her eyes flicked from the screen to me and back again. The light from the device cast a pale, ghostly glow on her sharp features. She looked terrified. "Is everything all right, Elena?" my mother asked softly. She reached out to pat the younger woman's hand. Elena didn't move. She didn't even blink. She slid her phone across the table toward Julian instead. It landed on the white cloth with a soft thud. Julian glanced down, his smirk still firmly in place. Then he read the headline. His expression didn't just change, it disintegrated. The confident patriarch role he had been practicing vanished instantly. My brother's breathing became shallow and fast. He looked at the phone, then at me, then back at the phone. The article was a deep dive into the logistics sector's most aggressive new player. It mentioned a silent founder who had quietly acquired 3 of Julian's biggest competitors. There were no photos, but the name was there in bold print. Ava Hayes. The name he had used as a punchline for years was now his biggest threat. "This is a mistake," Julian whispered. He looked at my father for help. But our father was busy squinting at the screen. The table was a wreckage of half-eaten steak and broken illusions. My mother's hand finally fell away from Alina's shoulder. She looked at me as if I were a stranger who had just walked into her house. I didn't say a word. I just watched them realize that the girl they excluded had outgrown their world. The waiter returned to refill our glasses, unaware of the carnage. He poured the wine with practiced grace, the liquid gurgling into the crystal. Julian suddenly stood up, his chair screeching harshly against the dark wood floor. People at the neighboring tables turned to look. He opened his mouth to shout, but no sound came out. Elena grabbed his wrist and pulled him back down. She looked at me with a new, sharp respect. The bill was coming. Julian slumped back into his seat, his confidence replaced by a hollow stare. The restaurant's soft jazz felt like a mockery. My father grabbed the phone, his face draining of color as he scrolled through the financial data. He looked at me, then back at the screen, his mouth working silently. I remained perfectly still, a statue in the center of their collapsing theater. I didn't need to speak to confirm their ruin. My silence was the verdict. "Ava, what is this?" my father finally managed to ask. His voice was thin, stripped of its usual booming authority. He looked around the room, worried that the other diners might sense the shift in power. My mother reached for her pearls, a nervous habit from my childhood. She was trying to find a way to make this look like a planned family surprise. It was a desperate move. I watched her struggle with the new reality. The waiter set down a silver tray of espresso cups. Each small clink felt like a hammer striking an anvil. Julian reached for a cup, but his hand shook so violently that the spoon rattled against the saucer. He looked at Alina, searching for a sign of solidarity. She didn't offer any. She was busy calculating the valuation of my company in her head. She knew exactly what it meant for Julian's future. He was a sinking ship. "You said you were doing some tech thing," Julian whispered harshly. He was trying to blame me for his own lack of curiosity. "You said it was complicated." I looked him in the eye for the first time that night. I didn't see the brother who had bullied me. I saw a man who had built a life on stolen credit and loud lies. He was terrified of the debt collector sitting across the table. He was right to be. My mother leaned forward, her eyes bright with a sudden, fake warmth. "We always knew you had a sharp mind, Ava," she lied. The words tasted like ash. She was already trying to weave me back into the family tapestry. She wanted to claim the success she had spent years trying to suppress. It was a tactical error. I pushed my chair back slightly, creating a physical gap they couldn't bridge. They were outsiders now. Elena cleared her throat, her professional curiosity overriding the social tension. "Is it true about the warehouse acquisition in Singapore?" she asked. The table went quiet again. My father's eyes widened at the mention of such a massive deal. He had been trying to get a foot in that market for a decade. I gave a single, slow nod. The realization hit him like a physical blow. I had succeeded where he had failed repeatedly. "Why didn't you tell us you needed help?" my father asked. It was his last attempt to exert control. He wanted to pretend that my success was somehow a result of his guidance. I smiled, a small and cold expression. I didn't answer him, because the truth was too sharp for this room. He looked down at the phone again, and realized something new. There was a second notification. It was a legal notice from my firm. We were suing them. The legal notice on the screen glowed like a radioactive omen. My father's hand began to shake, causing the phone to tap rhythmically against the mahogany table. He looked at me with eyes that finally saw a predator instead of a child. A patent infringement suit. He whispered. The booming voice that used to dictate my curfew was gone. Julian grabbed the phone back, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. He knew his firm's entire infrastructure was built on my code. My mother tried to laugh, but the sound was brittle and dry. She reached out to adjust my collar, her habit of fixing things she didn't understand. I leaned back before her fingers could touch my skin. The rejection was quiet but absolute. Ava, we are family, she pleaded. Her eyes darted toward the other tables, terrified of a public scene. She still prioritized the room's perception over her daughter's reality. I watched her realize the old rules were dead. Julian leaned forward, his silk shirt stained with a drop of espresso. You can't do this, Ava. It will ruin me. His voice was a desperate rasp. He looked at Alina, but she had already moved her chair several inches away from him. She was an analyst. She didn't invest in burning buildings. The power in the room had shifted toward the quietest person at the table. I felt the steady hum of the restaurant around us, but our corner was frozen. The waiter arrived with the check, placing it discreetly near my father's elbow. Nobody looked at it. The leather folder sat there like a ticking bomb. My father's breathing was heavy and labored. He had spent 40 years building a name that I was about to dismantle in 40 minutes. He looked at the legal text again, searching for a loophole that didn't exist. My lead counsel was the best in the country. He had already lost this battle. Why? My father asked. It was a simple question, devoid of his usual arrogance. I looked at the dark wood of the table, remembering all the times I was told to stay silent. I thought of the holiday barbecues, where I was the punchline for his business friends. I thought of the networking nights where I was hidden away like a shameful secret. I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt nothing but the cold weight of a long overdue debt. Elena spoke up, her voice surprisingly steady. The lawsuit covers the entire logistics interface, doesn't it? I nodded slowly. She looked at Julian with a mixture of pity and professional detachment. She knew his engagement gift to her was bought, with money he hadn't technically earned yet. The diamond on her finger suddenly looked like a liability. Julian saw her expression and flinched. He was losing his fiancée and his career at the same table. The room felt smaller. My mother made one last attempt to salvage the evening. Let's just go home and talk about this like a family. She stood up, her purse clutched tightly against her chest. She expected me to follow, to fall back into line. I didn't move. I reached into my bag and pulled out a single, black business card. I slid it across the white linen toward my father. He looked at the gold lettering and frowned. It wasn't my company card. My father picked up the black card with trembling fingers. He squinted at the gold text, expecting a corporate logo. Instead, he saw the name of a private liquidation firm. His face went from pale to a ghostly, translucent white. "This isn't your company," he muttered. I leaned forward, my shadow stretching across the table. "No," I said quietly. "It is the company that currently holds the primary note on your family estate." The dinner air turned ice cold. Julian let out a jagged, choked sound. He reached for his water, but his coordination had deserted him. The glass tipped, sending a cold wave across the white cloth. Nobody moved to clean it. The water soaked into the fine linen, spreading toward the legal notice. My brother looked at me with pure, unadulterated terror. He finally understood that his sister didn't just want a seat at the table. I was already the landlord of their entire lives. My mother sank back into her velvet chair. The pride she had worn for Julian all evening had evaporated. She looked at the spilled water, her lips moving without sound. Her perfect world was dissolving in the middle of a downtown restaurant. "Iva, we can settle this," she whispered. Her voice lacked the sharp edge she usually used to correct me. I didn't blink. I had settled it months ago in the dark of my quiet apartment. They were late. Elena finally stood up, her movements fluid and decisive. She took off the engagement ring and placed it on the damp tablecloth. The diamond caught the flickering candlelight, throwing a sharp spark against the wood. Julian stared at the ring as if it were a poisonous insect. "I can't be part of this," Elena said to him. She didn't look back as she walked away. Her departure was the final seal on the family's public execution. The room watched. My father dropped the black card as if it were burning his skin. He looked at me, searching for a spark of the daughter he used to manage. He found only the founder who had outmaneuvered him. "How long have you been planning this?" he asked. His voice was a dry rattle in the back of his throat. I adjusted my watch, the metal cool against my wrist. "I didn't plan it," I replied. "I just stopped stopping it." The waiter hovered near the corner, unsure if he should intervene. The manager watched from the shadows of the bar, his hand on a phone. The social safety net my parents relied on was fraying. My mother started to sob quietly, a sound that finally broke the heavy silence. Julian didn't comfort her. He was too busy checking his bank app, his eyes wide with frantic realization. All his accounts were locked. I had triggered the compliance clauses. I stood up slowly, smoothing the front of my dress. The movement was ceremonial. My father tried to stand too, but his knees seemed to buckle under the weight of the truth. He looked like an old man for the first time in his life. I reached down and picked up the black card he had dropped. I didn't leave it for him. I had one more stop to make tonight. My phone buzzed with a message from my driver. I walked toward the exit, my heels clicking rhythmically against the polished stone floor. Behind me, the muffled sounds of my family's panic began to bleed into the restaurant's ambient hum. Julian was shouting at his phone, his voice cracking with a frantic, high-pitched desperation. My father remained seated, a broken silhouette against the flickering candlelight. I didn't turn back to look at them. My objective was clear now. I needed to sign the final divestment papers before the midnight deadline. If I missed it, the holding company's window for foreclosure would close for another year. The cool night air hit my face like a physical reset as I stepped onto the sidewalk. My driver, Marcus, held the door open with a neutral expression. I slid into the back of the black sedan, the scent of expensive leather grounding me. I pulled my laptop from its slim case, the screen's blue light cutting through the darkness. A red notification pulsed in the corner of the display. My lead counsel had sent the final documents for my signature. The pressure was mounting. We moved through the city streets, the blurred lights of skyscrapers reflecting on the glass. Suddenly, the car jerked as Marcus slammed on the brakes. A silver SUV had cut us off, forcing us to the curb. My heart hammered against my ribs as the driver's door of the SUV flew open. Julian stepped out, his silk shirt disheveled and his eyes wide with a manic energy. He had followed us from the restaurant. He looked like a man with nothing left to lose. Julian pounded on my window, the sound echoing inside the quiet cabin. I didn't roll it down. I watched him through the tinted glass, his face distorted by rage and fear. "Open the door, Avow," he screamed. His voice was muffled, but the intent was unmistakable. Marcus shifted the car into gear, looking for an opening in the traffic. We were trapped between the curb and the silver SUV. My brother's desperation was a variable I hadn't fully factored into my exit strategy. I looked at my laptop screen, where the clock showed 11:40 p.m. I had 20 minutes to finalize the deal that would dissolve the family estate. Julian was now kicking the tire, his movements erratic and violent. I realized he wasn't just angry about the money. He was terrified of the exposure. He had used the family name to secure illegal offshore loans. If I signed these papers, those loans would default immediately. The authorities would be at his door by dawn. "Marcus, get us out of here," I said. My voice steady despite the adrenaline. My driver nodded and gripped the steering wheel. He saw a narrow gap between the silver SUV and a parked delivery truck. He didn't hesitate. The sedan roared to life, the tires screeching as we swerved into the street. We left Julian standing in the middle of the road, a small and diminishing figure in the rearview mirror. I returned my focus to the screen. The turn was coming. As I scrolled through the final clauses, I noticed a name I didn't recognize in the creditor list. It wasn't a bank or a private equity firm. It was a holding company registered in my mother's maiden name. I paused, my finger hovering over the digital signature pad. The power balance shifted in an instant. My mother hadn't just been a passive observer of my father's business. She was the one who had been funding Julian's illegal ventures behind the scenes. This new detail changed everything. If I signed the papers now, I wouldn't just be taking back the estate. I would be sending my own mother to prison alongside my brother. The cold efficiency I had maintained all night flickered for a brief second. I looked out the window at the passing city. The skyscrapers felt like bars. I had spent years wanting them to see me. Now, I was the only one who could see the full extent of their shared crimes. The car pulled up to the curb in front of my office building. The glass facade gleamed under the streetlights, a monument to the life I had built in silence. I stepped out, clutching my laptop to my chest. The lobby was empty, the marble floors reflecting the overhead lights. I walked toward the elevators, my mind racing through the legal implications. I needed to decide if my desire for justice outweighed the blood in my veins. The elevator doors slid open. I reached the top floor and walked into my dark office. I sat behind my desk, the city spread out below me like a glowing map. The midnight deadline was only 5 minutes away. I opened the document one last time, my eyes scanning the signature line. Then, my personal phone buzzed on the desk. It was a video file from an unknown number. I tapped play and saw a grainy recording of the dining room. Someone had been recording us the entire time. The video was shaky, but the audio was crystal clear. It captured the exact moment Alina exposed my identity at the table. My family looked like caricatures of themselves. Frozen in a state of high-definition shock, I watched my mother's hand retreat from my shoulder, as if my skin had turned to hot ash. The recording wasn't from a phone, the angle was too steady and hidden. It had been filmed from a pinhole camera, disguised as a button on my brother's jacket. I realized then that Julian had been recording the engagement to secure proof of his social standing for his offshore lenders. He had accidentally documented the entire confession of his financial crimes and our mother's silent participation. I looked at the clock again. 3 minutes until the divestment deadline. I had the power to delete the file or use it as the final nail in their coffin. My objective remained the same. I had to secure my company's future while protecting my soul. The elevator chimed in the hallway, the sound echoing through my silent office suit. Someone was here. I walked to the glass door and saw Elena standing there. She was still wearing the same dress from the restaurant, but her expression was sharp and focused. She didn't look like a heartbroken fiancée. She looked like a woman who had just found the winning ticket. She held up a flash drive, She had the physical backup of the original, unedited footage that Julian thought he had deleted from the cloud. I didn't give him the password, Alina said through the intercom. Her voice was steady and devoid of any sentimentality. She had realized Julian was using her for her reputation. She wanted a deal of her own. She was the one who had sent the video to my phone as a demonstration of her value. The pressure in the room intensified. If I worked with her, I could insulate myself from the coming legal storm. If I refused, she might sell it elsewhere. I opened the door and let her in. The city lights behind her created a halo of cold neon. We didn't waste time on pleasantries. She placed the drive on my desk beside the laptop. Julian is speeding toward the central precinct right now, she whispered. He thinks he can blame the missing funds on you. It was a classic Julian move. He was trying to frame me for the very theft he had committed. He was desperate and dangerous. The power balance had shifted again. I wasn't just fighting for an estate anymore. I was fighting for my freedom. I sat down and opened the drive. There was a second file, a spreadsheet detailing every transaction my mother had authorized. It was a digital ledger of laundered funds that matched the offshore loan signatures perfectly. The numbers were staggering. She hadn't just funded Julian. She had been laundering money through my father's shell companies for years. They weren't just a dysfunctional family. They were a sophisticated criminal enterprise. I felt a sudden, sharp wave of nausea. I looked at Alina. Why help me? I asked. She smiled. But it wasn't a warm expression. It was the smile of a predator recognizing an equal. Because Julian is a loser, she said. And you are the one who actually knows how to build things. She wanted a seat at my new table. She was offering me the heads of my enemies on a silver platter. I had 60 seconds to sign the papers and decide her fate. My hand hovered. I signed the divestment documents with a single, fluid motion. The screen flashed a confirmation message. It was done. The family estate was now under my total control. The next step was the irreversible decision. I clicked the button to forward the evidence drive to the federal prosecutor's office. I didn't exclude my mother. I didn't protect Julian. The silence I had lived in for years was finally turning into a roar. I felt a strange, cold weight lift. What about your mother? Alina asked, watching the progress bar on the screen. I closed the laptop and stood up. I didn't answer her right away. I walked to the window and looked down at the streets. The black sedan was still waiting at the curb. I knew what the fallout would look like. The headlines would be brutal. The family name would be dragged through the dirt. But it wasn't my name anymore. I had rewritten it in my own image. The micro twist came in the form of a final text. It was from my father, sent from a burner phone. The safe in the library. It read, "The real documents are there." I realized my father had been keeping his own secrets. He hadn't been the leader, he had been the fall man all along. He had given me the key to his own destruction. He wanted it to end. I looked at Alina. We have one more stop to make tonight. The library in our family estate was cold, smelling of old paper and hidden sins. Dust danced in the beam of my flashlight as I approached the heavy oak desk. Alina stood by the door, her silhouette sharp against the moonlight. The burner phone I had taken from my father's jacket at the restaurant pulsed in my pocket. I found the hidden latch behind the third shelf. The wall groaned as a small steel safe was revealed. The cold metal bit into my fingertips as I dialed the code. The heavy door creaked open, exposing a thick stack of blue folders. These weren't just business contracts. They were adoption papers and revised birth certificates. I felt the air leave my lungs in a sharp, painful rush. My name was at the top of every document, but the parentage was wrong. Julian and I were not biological siblings. I was the only child of the woman who actually founded the original family firm. They had stolen my entire life. I realized then why they had spent years trying to make me small. My father hadn't been protecting me. He was hiding the evidence of a corporate coup. My biological mother hadn't abandoned me. She had been pushed out by the very people I called family. The lie I had lived was finally resolving into a brutal truth. I gripped the edge of the desk, my knuckles turning white. The anger I felt was quiet, cold, and absolutely final. Elena stepped closer, her eyes scanning the stolen documents. She didn't look surprised. She looked like she was evaluating a new set of assets. "This gives you total legal claim to every cent they ever made," she whispered. The power balance shifted one last time. I wasn't just a successful founder. I was the rightful owner of the entire Hayes legacy. My family were merely caretakers who had forgotten their place. I looked at the papers and felt nothing. I didn't need their stolen money to be whole. I had already built a kingdom in the silence they forced upon me. I took a slow breath and gathered the folders into my bag. I didn't look back at the room that had been my prison. I walked past Elena, my pace steady and sure. The truth had set me free, but it had also left me completely alone. I was ready to burn the bridge they had built on lies. As I stepped onto the porch, sirens began to wail in the distance. Blue and red lights reflected off the fountain in the driveway. The federal prosecutor had received the files I sent from the office. Julian and my parents would be answering for their crimes before sunrise. I watched the police cars swarm the estate like